What a great night of fights we just had. Some solid fights for sure, but had such an underwhelming ending to close it out. And we did all right with the picks. I got every fight correct until my lock of the week fought Loner Kavanagh. That was really disappointing. But the underdog of the week, Mario Bautista, he came through right after that. So obviously the Conor McGregor pick, gosh, that didn't go well. We really didn't know what version of Conor we were gonna get. So I took a chance on him. But I can't even say it was a bad pick because of his performance. I'm pretty sure his knee blew out the first kick he threw. So it was just such a weird sequence of events. I'm going to talk about the fights for a little bit. But, I started watching around the Kong Wang fight. I'm not really sure what happened before that fight. To start out with Alessandro Costa, I thought that was an easy pick. He got the job done. I thought Ryan Gondra was an easy pick. I was ready to make Gondra a confident pick, but a lot of people were on Zach Reese, so it made me kind of second guess myself. But we got the Gondra pick correctly. I heard Farid Bashra, he had a close fight, and if that's the case, then Ethan Ewing probably would have beat him. Damian Penis, he found the right shot to put Cesar Almeida to sleep. I said Penis would be the first person to knock out Almeida, and he did do that. And who else? Kong Wang, I thought she had a good performance. I don't really remember her fight. Luke Riley, I thought that was going to be a mismatch, and I saw a ton of money go on Kai Kamaka right before the fight. That made no sense to me. Adrian Yanis beats up washed Cody Garbrandt. Gable Stevenson, he gets the knockout in his victory, but honestly, that looked like a 50-50 fight. Stevenson was getting hit, I'm not going to lie. I'm not sure why he was the biggest favorite in UFC history, but he got the job done. Robert Whitaker, sensational performance. We're talking about a championship caliber fighter versus a journeyman. No way the odds should have been that close for Robert Whitaker. And the King Green fight went exactly the way I expected. Green, I said he would weather the storm and then come back to win by knockout. Then the Loner Kavanagh fight, such a heartbreaking fight to watch. I thought he performed well uh by just I don't know. But Roy Val, he played it smart, by going for the takedowns because both guys were getting rocked on the feet. But I thought Loner looked good despite the loss. And then yeah, Mario Bautista, that fight, underdog of the week, great performance there. I've been trying to tell everyone Mario Bautista is legit. I've picked him to win every fight he's been in, except the Umar fight. But I'm been saying Mario is the dark horse, man. He's a dark horse of the division. BSD, he got choked out in like 10 seconds. I thought he was skilled enough to not get submitted. Just like by going for takedowns. I knew Patty was gonna go for submissions, but I thought he would be able to defend those submissions. And then finally, Conor McGregor, he blows his knee out. Like I'm not even sure what to make of that. Conor looked like he didn't want to be there to start the fight. Then instantly he blows out his knee. I don't even want to say it was a bad pick. It was just a weird sequence of events, but let's move on. Only three wrong this week. One of them was the lock of the week, unfortunately. But overall, I don't think it was bad, right? Only three wrong. So let's move on to this week's prediction episode where we have Dricus du Plessis versus Kamaru Usman, where I'll be breaking down, discussing, predicting every fight on the card, starting with Alden Coria versus Stewart Nicoll. I'm picking Alden Coria to win this fight. I think Alden should keep this fight on the feet and win the striking exchanges. This seems like a pretty straightforward pick. I'm picking Alden Coria, and I've picked him to win every fight since he has entered the UFC, and there's no way I'm going to fade him here. Ever since I've seen him fight on the regional scene, I can see how good this guy really is. His footwork is phenomenal. His timing is great. His shots are accurate. And he's calm and patient and knows how to pick his shots very well. And he was a massive underdog in his UFC debut versus Alessandro Costa, but still, I backed him to win that fight, and he ended up getting a third-round TKO victory. Then next fight, he takes on a tough Luis Gurul and gets another dominant performance. Now fighting Stewart Nicoll. This seems like a major step down in competition for Alden Coria, because when you're comparing Stewart Nicoll to Alessandro Costa and Luis Gurul, Stewart is much worse in my opinion. So if I pick Costa to beat those first two guys, you already know I'm picking him to win here against an even easier opponent. Stewart Nicoll is 0-3 in the UFC. There hasn't been a single performance where I thought there might be hope for him in this promotion, right? It really seems like he doesn't have what it takes to be a UFC caliber fighter. He got submitted very quickly in his UFC debut versus Jesus Aguilar. He got dominated in the striking exchanges by Lucas Rocha in his next fight. And most recently, he got hit with a nasty body shot by Alessandro Costa in the second round. Stewart Nicoll, his game is basically trying to get you to the ground. That's what he wants to do. close the distance, and try to find a way to either control you or submit you. But his striking is it's at such a low level that he struggles to set up the takedowns. He struggles to get any takedowns because he can't close the distance using his striking, and he can't set up any takedowns because of his poor striking, you know? And I rate Alden Corea's striking very highly. I see this match kind of like the Lucas Rocha Stewart Nicoll fight, where Rocha was able to easily keep this fight on the feet and put a beating on Stewart. Stewart's going to struggle to close the distance here or get any takedowns because the striking difference will be very evident. Coria is going to pick him apart using his distance management, his shot selection, being patient, and accuracy, and his pressure. I just think Coria, he's too explosive, too long and fluid, and he's going to make it pretty much hell for Stewart Nicoll. Corea's footwork is too slick, his striking is too sharp, and his distance management, it's excellent. And Stewart Nicoll, he's a grappling first type of guy, but his striking is so poor. Being 0-3 in the UFC, I just think Coria is going to be able to keep it standing and then just pick Nicoll apart for the majority of this fight. So let's move on to our next fight of the night. We got Levi Rodrigues versus Felipe Franco. I'm going to pick Levi Rodrigues to win this. I think Levi's striking should be more diverse here. But I will say, in Felipe Franco's last fight in his debut in the UFC, he was the biggest underdog on the card versus Mario Pinto, and he lost the fight. But he did not look anywhere near plus 700 or whatever he was as an underdog. He made Mario Pinto basically beg for the final bell to be whistled. You know, he made the fight a lot closer than the odds suggested, and he basically made Mario Pinto want to clinch, stall against the fence, rather than trade any shots in the center of the octagon. So it was for sure an impressive performance for Felipe Franco. He looked a lot better than anyone thought he would. But with all that being said, I have to favor Levi Rodrigues here. Levi Rodrigues is an absolute mother trucker, dude. Like, Levi is so versatile with his head kicks, knees, monstrous hooks, with so much power behind all those shots. He seems athletic, fluid, and powerful. I feel like he's the type of fighter he's not going to shy away from standing in the center of the octagon. He believes in his abilities, and he's ready to showcase what he brings to the UFC. And of course, we saw Felipe Franco. He's no joke either. You know, this dude is coming in to bang as well, so this has potential to be an explosive firefight. I just think Levi might be on a higher level. He's too accurate with his shots, too versatile with his shots, and I think that versatility will allow him to be a step ahead here in this fight, you know, having more options to play with. You know, that's pretty much how I see this fight playing out. Levi using his Muay Thai, the heavy leg kicks, the forward pressure, knees up the middle, devastating hooks. I think all those weapons combined are going to be too overwhelming. You know, cutting off the cage, trapping Franco, and unloading heavy shots. Franco, you know, he actually comes from a grappling background, and that's definitely his best path to win here. You know, he needs to try and time a double leg takedown and get this fight to the ground, because I do believe Levi is the superior striker. One thing to note about this fight, though, Levi Rodrigues, he got his last fight overturned because he got popped for a banned substance, meaning if he has to perform this fight without those performing enhancing drugs for the first time, now that he is in the UFC, we might see a completely different version of him. But I'm counting on him to be able to maintain his abilities and dominate this matchup in the striking, you know, using his explosive Muay Thai striking, powerful and diverse offense. And I will say, Franco, like I said, he's tough. He's a tough grappler, and his striking looked really good. But I think it's not going to be on the same level of Levi Rodrigues. I just think Levi's going to be able to use his versatility and overwhelm Franco on the feet. So let's move on. Next fight on the card, we have Alvin Hines versus Richard Harris. I'm going to pick Richard Harris to win this fight. I'm taking a chance on Richard based off of his size and the fact that Alvin didn't look good in his debut. I'm going to pick Richard Harris just based off of his size, his youth, and his potential. You know, I feel like Alvin Hines, he's too rigid in his movement, you know, especially in his last fight. And in this fight, he'll be severely undersized in this matchup as well. I'm not convinced Alvin Hines is UFC potential. You know, I don't think he's UFC level. Now, Richard Harris, he is making his debut, stepping in about 2 weeks notice, looking good on the regional scene. We're still not sure if his skills can translate to the UFC level, but I just don't think Alvin Hines is a UFC level guy, so I don't think it matters, in this matchup. Like I said, Richard Harris, he's massive. The dude is 6'6" with an 80-inch reach advantage, or with an 80-inch reach. He uses his size and his weight to pretty much bully guys in the clinch. He likes to pressure opponents against the fence, in the clinch, wear you down, and he has knockout power, but he usually leans into his grappling and then goes for takedowns. Alvin Hines, he looked pretty good on the regional scene, but his debut fight versus Jonathan Deniz, I thought it wasn't a good showing. I didn't like his footwork. He ate too many shots. He has power in his hands, but he can have a hard time landing and timing his shots. I feel like Alvin, he can get drawn into a brawl, while Harris is more likely to stick to a clean game plan and play this fight smart by pushing hands up against the fence, wearing him down, and finding a submission. Because Harris is actually, he has this huge frame with a strong clinch game and a submission threat as well. It's a tough matchup for everyone. And Hines, he's powerful, but I feel like he's too rigid. He didn't really impress me in his UFC debut. I feel like he's going to have a hard time landing the right shots, especially with Harris being so big. So I just think Harris is going to use his size and his grappling edge to win this fight. So let's move on to one of the best fights on the card, Seok Ko versus Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani. I'm picking Seok Ko to win this fight. Seok Ko has been nothing short than impressive. Seok Ko has been nothing but impressive lately, right? I just think he's the better wrestler here, and even the better striker. I think he's so heavy on top when he gets guys down to the ground, and his distance management in the striking, it's super high level as well. So I feel like he can beat John Paul everywhere the fight goes, but this is probably one of the toughest fights to call on the card. These two are prospects with tremendous skill, right? I see this being a competitive fight, and it really comes down to who I think can implement their game plan on the other guy. The thing is, both guys are highly skilled on the ground. Seok Ko, once he gets top control, it's a nightmare to deal with. His top control is so heavy, and once he's on top of you or has your back, it seems like he's just so physically strong that there's a very slim chance that you'll escape his grasp. And then Jean-Paul Lebosnoyani, he's a guy who has no quit in him. He'll strike with you for a bit, then go for takedowns, and he's such a dog. In his last fight versus Philip Rowe, he was the much shorter guy, but despite being the much smaller guy, he would still strike from a distance and then mix in takedowns. And he did that up until the final round. And it was an impressive victory because it showed how deep he's willing to dig to get the win. Even though Philip Rowe would land his jab being the much longer guy, John Paul would still try to time overhands and eventually go for takedowns. So this fight really comes down to both guys wanting to control the other guy, both guys wanting to get the takedowns. It's pretty much whoever can get the takedowns will probably win this fight. So if that's the case, I'm leaning with Seok Ko because two things can happen when both guys want to mix in their grappling. The first option is the grappling cancels out. Then it turns into a striking match. And if it turns into a striking match, I do think Seok Ko is the better striker. His ability to manage distance and then hit you when you least expect it is super high level. He's very patient and knows when to let his shots go. So I think Seok Ko is the better striker if it's strictly a striking match. The second option of when both guys want to mix in their grappling is the better striker usually gets his takedowns. Seok Ko can use his striking to set up his takedowns. They'll be too predictable. Look, if John Paul is struggling in the striking realm, he's going to struggle to get his takedowns. They'll be too predictable. He'll be shooting for takedowns from too far. He'll get his takedown stuffed and continue to get picked apart in the striking. Then Seok Ko can implement his own takedowns, being the better striker. And from Seok Ko's last fight with Philip Rowe and his fight with Oban Elliott, and also his fight on the Contender Series, we saw his distance management in the striking. It was so high level. I feel like his ability to manage distance and know when to throw, it's on another level than these guys. So that's why I feel like he can handle himself in the striking in order to set up his takedowns. And once he has top control, it's pretty much over. This guy is so heavy and strong when he has his hands locked on you. I remember I made Seok Ko lock of the week when he fought Philip Rowe. I believe it was his last fight, and he was like minus 180 odds. That was probably one of the best odds on a fighter I've ever gotten. And Seok Ko, he did what he always does: manage distance, be unpredictable with his timing and striking. and then randomly surprising his opponents with takedowns and maintaining that heavy top control. And I imagine the same thing happens here. Seok Ko, he's really good at draining his opponent's energy, staying heavy on top of them, smothering them, and then making them like gasp for air, right? He's a gold medalist in sambo as well. He's literally a sambo champion. So as improved as John Paul's striking has looked lately, uh John Paul coming from a grappling background, I don't think he'll be the better striker. And on the ground, his best chance is just grabbing a submission because I don't think he can out physical Seok Hyun Ko, who seems way too strong in the clinch and on the ground. Seok Hyun Ko, he has elite top control. He's a patient striker and he's a sambo champion. Whereas Jean Paul, he's tough and he's relentless and he's well-rounded. He's a well-rounded competitor. I just think Seok Hyun Ko is gonna have the cleaner striking, which leads to a dominant wrestling performance, right? So moving on from this fight, we got Jose Delgado versus Austin Bashi. I'm going to pick Jose Delgado. I do think Jose Delgado will use his size and piece Bashi up on the feet, and land the damaging shots to where even if Bashi does land the takedown, it's not enough to win the rounds. I think I have to pick Delgado here. First thing that stands out is the size difference. Delgado is going to be much bigger, 5 inches taller, and I think Austin Bashi is going to have a hard time getting the takedowns on such a big opponent. Nathaniel Wood is the same size as Austin Bashi, and he was able to beat Delgado, but that's because Nathaniel Wood is a master in striking and distance management and didn't need to get the takedowns, while Austin Bashi seems like he needs to get the takedowns or else he's cooked in the striking. Like we saw in his fight with Christian Rodrigues, when he couldn't control Christian Rodrigues was able to just piece him up on the feet. And even Nathaniel Wood, he got dropped in the first round in his fight with Delgado, but managed to win the striking exchanges in the next 2 rounds. And Nathaniel Wood was also able to secure a takedown, but that was in the third round after a hard-paced first 2 rounds. So maybe in this fight, when Delgado slows down after beating up Bashi for the first 2 rounds, Bashi can get a takedown in the third round. But in the first 2 rounds, I expect Delgado to land the heavy shots time and time again. I don't think Bashi can recover and find his way back into the fight the same way Nathaniel Wood did, because Bashi, he doesn't have that level of striking. If Bashi is still standing in the third round, maybe he can secure a takedown, but it won't be enough to win the fight. I think Delgado can replicate that same fight Christian Rodrigues had with Austin Bashi. Just defend the takedowns, be the bigger guy, snipe from range, and land the heavy shots throughout the fight. And the thing about Bashi though, he won't give up on himself. He can eat a few shots, but he'll continue pursuing the takedowns. But I think he's a case of a fighter who has more heart than skill, especially when it comes to striking. And that's not always a good thing because having heart can only take you so far, but it's skill that can truly win you a fight. So I see Bashi eating a few shots, continuing to pursue the takedowns, maybe even securing a takedown here and there, but it won't be without closing the distance and eating heavy shots. And all that damage he'll take from closing the distance or attempting to close the distance will be enough to give the rounds to Delgado, because that's how I feel this fight is gonna go. Delgado being too technical from range, using sharp boxing, excellent footwork, knees up the middle to get Bashi hesitating on the takedowns, and landing enough damaging shots to win the round, even if he gets taken down late in the rounds. Delgado is going to have a massive size advantage here with dangerous boxing and heavy power. And Bashi, he's a wrestling heavy guy, but struggles if he can't secure the takedowns. So I think Jose Delgado will be able to stuff those takedowns and win the striking exchanges. So let's move on to our next fight of the night. We got Anna Meliciano versus Dion Barboza. I'm gonna pick Dion Barboza. I think she's gonna take her down and do what she always does, which is be heavy on top and keep the pressure going when she's on top of these opponents, right? Her opponent, or Anna Meliciano, she's a fighter from this season's Ultimate Fighter, stepping in on about 1 week's notice, I believe, after Veronica Hardy got injured. So it was supposed to be Hardy versus Barboza, but this is a striker versus grappler matchup. Anna Meliciano has a background in boxing, sharp and crisp striking, 3-inch reach advantage here, nice jab and combinations from the outside, while Barbosa is a chain wrestler who's trying to hunt for submissions and get this fight to the ground. Obviously, Dion Barbosa is more proven at the UFC level. We haven't seen Meliciano in the UFC yet. she has been impressive on the Ultimate Fighter. But I think stepping in on short notice against a tough Dion Barbosi, I'm leaning with Barboza. Melisano, she needs to use her takedown defense here, keep this fight standing, not get trapped against the fence, stay on the outside, and put up some high volume boxing combinations. I think it'll be a tough task to do when Barbosa can scramble really nicely, continue to chain wrestle, close the distance and change levels, and have that heavy top pressure. I think as the fight goes on, the more it favors Barboza, who has been training in a camp, doesn't mind dragging it to the deep waters in the later rounds. She can exhaust and wear down Meliciano and continue to dominate in those later rounds as well. Barbosa, she's a real chain wrestler with heavy top control. She's not going to give up on those takedowns. Whereas Meliciano, she does have sharp boxing, but taking the fight on short notice against Barboza, I just think Barbosa's grappling will be able to control this fight. So let's move on to our next fight of the night. We got one of the funnest matchups on the card, Tommy McMillen versus Alberto Montes. I do think Montes, being the cleaner striker, should prevail here. I'm going to pick Montes, but this is such a fun fight. When McMillen is fighting, you know it's going to be fireworks. He's going to come forward, swing wild, and someone is getting dropped. That style of his has gotten him in trouble multiple times in striking exchanges. He leaves himself vulnerable to getting clipped, and he's been dropped multiple times, but it's a fun style. I don't believe that style will fare well against Alberto Montes, who is basically the complete opposite. This guy is super technical, throws all his strikes by the textbook, composed, time his shots nicely, picks his shots nicely, actually thinks about his shot selection. I remember I made Montes my lock of the week last time he fought versus Ricky Turquoise, and Montes was like minus 180 odds in that fight. That was one of the best odds I've gotten on a fighter. I remember a lot of y'all were telling me it was a bad call to make him lock of the week. Montes was going to get overwhelmed by Ricky Turquoise's pressure. So don't think I forgot about that, but I always believed in Montes because he's actually super skilled in the striking. He stays composed against pressure fighters, finds his rhythm, times a good shot, and once he has you wobbled or dazed, he has submission skills that are second to none. His anaconda choke. Oh my gosh. My whole screen just like blanked out. But yeah, his anaconda choke, it's one of the cleanest and tightest chokes I've ever seen. My whole notes just went gone out of nowhere, but we're good. The thing is here about this fight, I'm not as confident in Alberto Montes as I was in his last fight because McMillen, he's a pressure fighter, kind of like the last two fighters that Montes fought, but McMillen is a pressure fighter with an enormous, enormous amount of heart. Like this dude will just not give up, and that grit and determination always has a chance. So I think this matchup is really about heart versus skill. We've seen McMillen show a ton of heart after getting dropped multiple times, still coming back after getting hurt and wobbled and continuing to fight versus Montes, who's a textbook fighter. I think Montes is clearly the better fighter skill-wise, so I think Montes can handle these brawlers. But Tommy McMillen, he's like the king of brawlers. Like he will literally just not stop. He will press forward, try to throw haymakers in your face, and that will get anybody in trouble. But the thing about Alberto Montes, he's not going to engage in a firefight. He's not going to engage in that type of fight. I usually always pick the better fighter, the more technical fighter, and I'm picking Montes. But like I said, McMillen, he's going to come in guns blazing from the start. But I do see Montes just not engaging in that type of fight. So, I've always said McMillen, if McMillen runs into someone who can slip and rip, someone who can counter really nicely, that's going to cause him a lot of trouble. And Montes is the type of guy who will be aware of the shots coming back at him and pick his shots, countering those swinging punches instantly. So I see Montes being the much cleaner striker on the feet, managing his distance much better and not willing to engage in a firefight, slipping and ripping, which is basically McMillen's weakness. Someone who won't throw back in a brawling type of style, someone who will just defend, stay calm, move back, then snipe right back into the pocket to land his shots and then step out of the way again. Montes isn't going to want to make this a fight of the night. He's going to want to make this a performance of the night. So Montes, he's going to want to have a clean performance, while McMillen, he's looking to make it a fun fight, a fan favorite type of fight. And Montes just wants the victory. But this is not a spot where I'm willing to make Montes lock of the week like I did like I did in his last fight, the last time he fought. I put Alberto Montes in all my parlays last time. The last time he fought, and it clearly paid off because he was only minus 180 against someone with no skill, just all heart, just like this matchup. McMillen, he doesn't have the skills as much as he has the heart. McMillen, he gets hit a lot, but he has a tremendous amount of heart. But when it comes to heart versus skill, you always have to lean into skill. But at the same time, it's Tommy McMillen. He's like the king of heart, and he's always in it. He's always dangerous. And McMillen will be about 5 inches taller and 5 inches longer in reach. Still, I'm leaning with skill over heart here. Montes is going to be more technical, more composed, and he's an elite counter striker with a dangerous submission game. And McMillen, he's just a wild brawler with endless heart, but he has defensive holes everywhere. So I think Alberto Montes, skill beats aggression in this matchup. We'll see how it turns out. Should be a fun fight. Moving on to our next fight of the night, we got Fatima Kline versus Tabatha Ricci. I'm picking I'm picking Fatima Kline. I think Fatima Kline is going to dominate in this matchup with her size and her skills in every aspect of the game. This has to be Fatima Kline. She's one of the best up-and-coming prospects in the UFC's women division. In every fight she's been in, she has looked impressive. She just destroyed Angela Hill. And yes, Angela is about 40 years old right now, but Angela just looked really good in her last fight. So not only has that win over Angela kind of aged well, but Fatima is finishing the other two women she fought in the UFC. The only loss on Fatima Kline's record is to Jasmine Jastovicius in Fatima's debut. Jasmine is a woman with a super big frame and is a monstrous takedown machine, and is a completely hard matchup for anyone having to deal with that size of a woman with the constant takedown threat. Now you're giving her a tiny little woman, Tabatha Ricci, who's going to be so much smaller than Fatima Kline. I see Fatima doing pretty much whatever she wants to do in this matchup, especially with how Tabatha Ricci has looked in her last fight versus Verna Jandiroba. Ricci couldn't get any offense going at all. I think Fatima Kline is the future of this division. It's going to take a lot more than this tiny woman like Tabatha Ricci to stop Fatima. Fatima is dangerous everywhere, super athletic, puts up a high pace, can strike at a high level, can wrestle at a high level, and the pace she's able to push, throwing up high volume combinations, boxing combinations, using her reach to stay on the outside. It's so overwhelming. I see Fatima being light on her feet, staying at range, being the longer fighter, pumping out her jab, putting combinations together. And if Tabatha tries to go for any takedowns, I see Fatima reversing her and ending up on top. Fatima's going to be 5 inches taller, 6 inches longer in reach. And I think Fatima is really good at fighting from range. So the kickboxing should definitely favor Fatima, which is going to force Tabatha to panic wrestle. But Fatima being too big, too strong to get controlled by Tabatha. So I see this fight being one-way traffic for Fatima Kline, being bigger, being faster. She's an elite prospect with striking and wrestling. Tabatha Ricci, she's tough, but I feel like she's going to be severely undersized against an opponent to this caliber. So I see Fatima Kline just dominating with her size and all-around skill, right? So moving on to our next fight, we got Chase Hooper versus Mitch Ramirez. Chase, I'll give you one more chance, buddy. I'm going to give you one last chance, bro, but 3 strikes and you're out. Because if you can't beat Mitch Ramirez, I can't pick you to win anymore. I'm going to say Chase is able to hang in the striking long enough to not get knocked out like he has been in his last 2 fights. I think Chase can even make this fight competitive in the striking. But I do think overall, I do think Hooper can get this fight to the ground where he excels. It really seems like we've kind of figured out Chase Hooper's weakness, which is strong power punchers that are difficult to take down. Like if Chase Hooper can't take you down and you pack a serious punch, you can pretty much just keep the fight on the feet and then bruise him up, right? And the thing about Mitch Ramirez, I think he has potential to hit hard, but I'm not convinced he can strike at a UFC level. Like his timing and his accuracy and his ability to find the right shots, I don't think it's able to translate to a UFC level. So I don't think Chase is completely toast if he can't get the takedowns. Mitch Ramirez, he doesn't strike me as this outstanding, accurate power puncher like at all. I think his striking can be a bit sloppy, so I'm not convinced he can capitalize on Chase Hooper's striking vulnerabilities if this fight is kept standing, right? And if Chase does manage to get this fight on the ground, the round is gonna be won by Chase because I don't think Mitch will be able to get back up. Mitch has gotten taken down early in his fights. He got taken down early in his last fight and he got controlled the entire round. So that's obviously what Chase is going to want to do, get this fight on the ground, which is where he's best at and on the ground, right? But he's gonna want to get this fight to the ground, get the body lock it up, secure a body lock, find the submission, and he can for sure win in that way because I think there's a serious level difference in terms of skills on the ground. And on the feet, like I said, Mitch is probably the better striker, but I wouldn't say Chase is gonna get knocked out early in the first round if he has to stand and strike with Mitch. So I think Chase can make it competitive on the feet, and you gotta think after getting TKO'd back to back in the first round, Chase has been working on his striking defense and striking overall. So I think Mitch is a good bounce back fight to showcase his improved striking. And for whatever reason, if Chase hasn't been working on his striking, he hasn't been working at all on his striking defense or his offense, I don't think Mitch can capitalize on his defensive vulnerabilities. So all Chase has to do is make it competitive in the striking, which I think he can against Mitch, and then find a way to get this fight on the ground where he excels at, because we know Hooper is an elite level grappler with improved striking, but Ramirez being the better striker, I think he's still hittable and vulnerable on the ground for sure, right? So I'm going to pick Chase Hooper to survive early on and takes over on the ground. Moving on to our next fight. Jared Cannonier versus Christian Leroy Duncan. Christian Leroy Duncan should be levels above here, especially in the striking. Look, I love Jared Cannonier. He's one of the coolest fighters ever, but he's not winning this fight. He's 42 years old. And sure, he doesn't look 42, but he for sure no longer has the skills to compete at a high level. He has lost 3 out of his last 4 fights, and the one fight he did win was to Gregory Rodrigues. And Jared got dropped in that fight multiple times and only won because Gregory Rodrigues gassed out, right? So I do feel like Jared's best days are behind him. He's too hittable now. He got TKO'd by Imavov, dropped by Kyle Bahario, and most recently got dropped by MVP. Now, these guys that I just named, they're high-level fighters without a doubt. But I would consider Christian Leroy Duncan to be a part of these high-level fighters. I have no problem placing him in that category of high-level fighters. This dude, Leroy Duncan, is moving like a lightweight in the octagon. The past 4 fights especially, he has looked like an absolute assassin. He dominates Andre Puleyev, knocks out Eric Anders early in the first round with a spinning back elbow, knocks out Marco Tulio with a spinning back fist, and most recently dominates Roman Dolidze. I think it's clear already he deserves a top contender type of fight, and he has to just pass the Jared Cannonier test to get there. I do think he'll pass this test with flying colors. Whether he gets the knockout or not, I see him dominating the striking exchanges. Christian Leroy Duncan, he has always been a sharpshooter, measured in his approach, but those 2 recent performances where he got those insane knockouts just shot him up into a whole other level. This should be Christian Leroy Duncan all day. Clearly, the striking is going to favor CLD. He's much more creative in there and unorthodox on the feet and throws more volume with those unpredictable strikes as well. And he has the youth and athleticism favoring him in this matchup as well. Jared, he needs to try and find a way to get this fight on the ground, in my opinion. But CLD is so buff and strong and has great balance. It's not easy to get a hold of someone like that or try to bully someone like that in the clinch or wrestling exchanges. On top of that, CLD is always moving, using his footwork, never staying stationary. And I have to think with where they both are in this stages of their careers, CLD carries the more power and he has the better durability, being the younger fighter with the momentum, fighting an aging veteran slowing down who's always struggled against high level contenders. I see Jared struggling to get this fight on the ground or finding success in the clinch. CLD's takedown defense has looked high level recently. In his last two fights with Roman Dolidze and Marco Tulio, he was able to scramble and reverse takedown attempts and land his own takedowns and transition from positions very smoothly, right? And when they tried initiating the clinch on CLD, he was able to just reverse these positions and break away as well. So I see CLD keeping this fight at range for the most part, using his long reach to land creative combinations, diverse kicks and punches, pressuring Jared, waiting for him to overextend and catch him with a crazy counter like a spinning back fist or spinning elbow like he has been doing, right? The more damaging shots should clearly come from CLD while Jared tries to clinch and stall against the fence, but CLD will be reversing positions and going back to striking. That's how I see the fight going. CLD being the more dynamic striker, creative offense with huge momentum coming into this matchup. Whereas Cannonier, he has that veteran experience and he's got solid power, but I think he's slowing down, especially with his recent performances. It says Jared Cannonier is 3-3 in his UFC career, but that definitely has to be wrong. And I think the last five is wrong there too. But look, I'm picking Christian Leroy Duncan to outclass Cannonier on the feet. Keeping this fight on the feet and then winning that fight that way. So let's move on to our next fight. We got the main event of the evening: Kamaru Usman versus Dricus du Plessis. I'm gonna pick Kamaru Usman. I think Usman is gonna find the takedowns. When was the last time Dricus du Plessis fought a high-level wrestler like Kamaru Usman? I feel like we have forgotten who Kamaru Usman actually is. You're giving me Kamaru Usman at 2-1 odds. This is the man who has a win over the current middleweight champion, Sean Strickland. This is a man who was once on a 16-fight win streak in the UFC alone. A man who dominated top contenders of the division in his prime. And I don't care if he's almost 40 years old. He just dominated a dangerous contender in Joaquin Buckley. And I don't care about the 3 losses he has before that either. Leon Edwards, he got a Hail Mary head kick knockout late in the fifth round. Kamaru Usman was the better fighter that night. Then in the rematch, he loses by majority decision in a close fight. And then loses to Khamzat Chimaev in a fight he arguably won, right? And then beats Joaquin Buckley right after that. I'm still riding the Kamaru Usman hype train. I'm not turning my back on him here. I still believe in him. I think he's super dangerous. I still think he's a problem for this division, right? Moving up to the middleweight division. Now I'm going to pay my respects to Dricus du Plessis because I'm not saying this is going to be an easy fight. DDP has wins over Robert Whittaker by knockout. He beat Strickland twice and submitted Israel Adesanya. These are seriously impressive wins, but after seeing his performance in his last fight to Khamzat Chimaev, I needed to seriously pause on the Dricus du Plessis train. I can't unsee the 25 minutes of Dricus du Plessis laying on his back, having no answer at all to the wrestling of Chimaev. Chimaev literally laid on him for 25 minutes and DDP couldn't do anything about it. And we just saw Kamaru Usman be able to do the same thing to Joaquin Buckley. Like, I have to think Kamaru Usman has what it takes to replicate a similar performance on DDP. And if you look at the victories for DDP lately, before losing to Khamzat Chimaev, he beat Sean Strickland, a fight where Sean did nothing in the striking. And then he beats Israel Adesanya, an Izzy who's out of his prime, and made the fight very close, Izzy did. And before that, it was Sean Strickland again, a fight where DDP arguably lost that fight, the first time they fought. Like, personally, I'm only truly impressed by the Robert Whittaker fight where he knocked out Robert in the second round. But all these victories that I just mentioned, Sean Strickland, Izzy, Robert Whittaker, none of these guys are high-level wrestlers. Kamaru Usman is one of the most well-rounded fighters still to this day, in my opinion. His striking is underrated. He picks his shots really nicely, nice sharp jab, and obviously has some insane power if he lands clean with the right hand. And he's one of the most overwhelming wrestlers in the game right now. He doesn't panic when he's in trouble. always stays in the fight, always stays technical, whether it's on the ground with Khamzat Chimaev on his back or in the striking, staying defensively sound and finding the right shots. I have to side with Kamaru Usman here. I don't think DDP has faced a wrestler to the caliber of Kamaru Usman. I still think Kamaru is super dangerous. Like when we see Dricus fight, he's like a wild brawler who isn't technical at all. He swings wild to close the distance, and sure, it's clearly been working for him. But against someone who is as disciplined in the game as Kamaru Usman, I feel like that won't work. All that marching forward pressure from DDP, I feel like Usman is just gonna meet him with a sharp jab down the middle and disrupt his rhythm. Right, Kamaru, he's been working with Trevor Whitman, the coach who just led Justin Gaethje to winning the lightweight title at like 39 years of age, someone who's a mastermind of the game, versus the coach of Dricus du Plessis, who was crying and complaining after the Khamzat fight, making all types of excuses. I just feel like Kamaru is the more proven, the more professional side. So I believe in Kamaru's striking. I believe in his wrestling. You know, his striking is like a sharp piston-like jab, bombs in his right hand, and don't even get me started on his wrestling. Kamaru has the wrestling skills to dictate where this fight takes place, whether it's defending takedowns to keep this fight in the center of the cage to want to strike, or mixing in his own takedowns to keep this fight in the center of the cage, and holding down Dricus du Plessis the same way that Khamzat did to Dricus du Plessis. So I feel like Kamaru is going to have a sharp game plan coming into this matchup to capitalize on the lunging movements of Dricus du Plessis to duck under and go for takedowns, take advantage of those moments, and also keep that jab in his face the whole time, bust him up in the striking like Sean Strickland did the first time Dricus du Plessis fought Sean Strickland, right? So I have to favor Usman. I still think he's an elite wrestler with underrated striking, especially in a technical versus brawler type of matchup here. So I'm going to lean with the championship experience, the years of defending titles from Usman, rather than the dangerous pressure fighter in Dricus du Plessis. I feel like he struggles badly against elite wrestlers, right? And even in the strikers, like when someone has a sharp jab like Strickland did, I feel like Usman has that sharp jab just like the same way as well. So I think Kamaru Usman is going to control this fight with the wrestling and just have disciplined striking, staying the much more professional fighter in there, the more disciplined fighter in there. So that concludes this week's predictions for UFC Dricus du Plessis versus Kamaru Usman. Hope you guys enjoyed. Till next time, peace.